Hello and thank you for joining us on Al Arabiya English. I'm Tom Burges-Watson. Now, during the past few weeks, Bangladesh has been rocked by some of the worst violence the country's seen in more than half a century. On the 5th of August, the Prime Minister of 15 years, Sheikh Hasina, was forced to flee by helicopter to neighbouring India, where she remains in self-imposed exile. An interim government, headed by the Nobel Peace laureate Muhammad Yunus, now runs the country. So what next for Bangladesh? More turmoil ahead, or an opportunity for the nation to revitalize and reform? Well, to help us answer those questions and more, I'm joined by Bangladeshi lawyer Irene Khan, who is also a UN Special Rapporteur for freedom of expression and opinion. Thank you so much for joining us from Dhaka, Irene. Let me start by asking you, is this a renaissance moment, do you think, for Bangladesh?
Well, renaissance is an interesting word to use because it was pretty blood-drenched, more of like a revolution moment. But indeed, it is a real opportunity for change. People are energized, young people in particular, have been doing things, engaging themselves in politics in a way that was never seen before in this country.
And were you surprised at the speed at which Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina left office? Or did you see this coming? Was there an element of predictability about all of this?
Well, that's an interesting question. She had been in power for 15 years. She had rigged four elections actually, just started the fourth term. So there was something in the air that said that it had to come to an end. She was becoming extremely autocratic. She had captured all the institutions. People just did not have any space to talk. There was no information flowing. And there were major problems, economic and otherwise, in the country. So it was bound to come. But at the end, it was a student demand about quotas in government service, a very innocuous subject on which the students have been complaining for a long time. And then suddenly it became violent because the government decided to bring out the security forces, to bring out their goons and beat up the students. And then the public joined. And at that moment, it was absolutely unstoppable what was happening. And the end was pretty obvious. But I think most people, probably including the previous regime, didn't realize how empty they were. She had lost total contact with her people. She had no idea of what was happening towards the end.
And just looking at the images when those protests were really at their peak, it looked as though the vast majority of people taking to the streets were from a younger generation. I'd just like to ask you, what are they now demanding, that younger generation? And are they managing to maintain that same level of momentum in their protest movement?
Well, what the young people are demanding is change. They don't want to have the same kind of corrupt government deals being done in the backroom. Growth, a lot of economic growth is taking place, but it doesn't benefit the people. Inequality is growing. They have renamed themselves as the anti-discrimination movement. So they're really looking for a more just, a more equal society, and they are demanding root and branch changes in institutions. Whether that is likely to happen or not remains to be seen, because it's always difficult. It's only 2 weeks, but certainly the group that is in charge now, led by Dr. Yunus, is probably the best that this country could find at this particular moment.
And yet, Professor Yunus is 84 years old, and the people who called for him to take office were from this younger generation. I mean, it seems slightly ironic. Why do you think he was their preferred choice of leader?
Well, because he has been an ideal for this country. He embodies all the values. His own life is a story of how he has helped to bring millions of people, women, out of poverty. And all those kinds of things have energized and inspired the young people. They see in him a leader that they have not seen in the political scene here. So I think that was what led them to invite him to take the leadership. They feel that under his guidance, they can move forward. And he himself has made it a particular point of his government to put the youth into every aspect of the administration, to engage with them, to listen to them, and to respond to them. So I think it's a fantastic relationship between people in their 80s, a man in his 80s, and these young people in their 20s coming together.
I mean, he's got some monumental tasks ahead of him. I mean, the list is extremely long, but perhaps not least, one might say, national reconciliation is pretty much at the top of that list of priorities. I mean, what else would you say he needs to address? And do you think he's up to addressing all of these priorities, given that he is not young? I mean, he is, as I said, 84 years old.
Well, I think he has set a time. Obviously, this is an interim government, so there has to be a limited time after which they will have to have elections. That's quite clear. He's not in this job for the long haul. I think the biggest task he has, as you said, is national reconciliation or some kind of stability, political stability in the country in order to be able to have those elections, but also the economic sector, the finance sector, the banking sector is in great trouble right now. The economy is not doing well. He has to build enough confidence for investors to come back. And after all, this movement, the student movement, was all about jobs and employment and equal opportunities. So that is where the government will have to focus as soon as they can. And I would like to add also the justice sector. There is a real desire here for justice. So many people have suffered from human rights violations. The killings that have recently took place are just the tip of the iceberg. There are people emerging from the dungeons of the intelligence services who have been locked up, who had disappeared for 9 years. So all kinds of human rights violations at all levels, the village, fights over land, fights over resources, all that. I think people really need to have national reconciliation, kind of transitional justice. They want to know the truth and they want to be able to move forward. So justice and the financial economic situation would be the two priorities.
Okay, I'm going to pick up on what you were saying about the investigation into those human rights violations in just a moment, but I'd like to go back to another point, which is about the elections that you also mentioned. I mean, were elections to be held in the next few weeks, it's pretty clear, isn't it? There'll be two parties in the running, and that being the case, this two-party system would inevitably deliver something the country's already seen in previous years. And that's not what the protest members, the protesters want, is it? They want something brand new. They want a breath of fresh air. And is the two-party system really going to be able to deliver that?
Well, that is why Yunus announced yesterday that his government would stay until some reforms had been made and then hold elections. So that's a clear message that there will be no elections under the current political system. Certainly the students wouldn't accept it, and the rest of the electorate wouldn't either, because we have seen this game every time. One party comes in, stays there for a number of years, very corrupt, very unsatisfactory, and then is thrown violently, and then another one comes in. We don't want a repetition of that. That is very, very clear. So I think there will have to be change in the political parties too, if they want to participate in the democratic elections. There is a lot of discussion now about whether there is the possibility of making some constitutional changes. The Yunus government has been in power now for about 10 days. So these are very early days. A lot of discussion going on about institutional change, about fundamental change, so that there can be a new type of politics in this country.
Going back to what you were saying about human rights violations, the UN has launched a provisional fact-finding mission. They want to get to the bottom of these human rights abuses. I'd like to ask if you're involved in any way in that, given your role as a UN Special Rapporteur, and what you're advising them if you are involved.
Yes, I am involved, not in the formal fact-finding. For that, of course, the experts will come, the forensics and other type of technical expertise. They will start work in the middle of September. One thing that is extremely important in situations like this is to document what has happened, to preserve the evidence, to get the stories from those who have suffered and so on. Because right now, we don't even know the exact numbers of people killed, and it could be anything from hundreds to thousands. So clarifying all that will be an extremely important task for this fact-finding mission. But beyond that is the question of what kind of justice would then be provided. As you know, some of the members of the previous government are here. They have been arrested. So some sort of justice system will have to be put into place for them. But beyond that, there are a lot of people at the level of communities that have been involved in human rights violations. So there is also talk of some form of transitional justice, Truth and Reconciliation Commission, perhaps, to bring communities together. So there's quite a lot of work to be done. This is not just human rights violations in the last few months. These violations go back 15 years for this regime and even longer for the regime before it. So this country has had a lot of bad experience on human rights, and this is a way of healing and finding an institutional system to prevent human rights violations as well.
Okay, and until a new administration is elected and put in place, are you confident that the army is going to be able to play an important part here in helping to keep control in the country, maintain an element of stability? And what sort of noises are we hearing from the army chief? That's General Waka Uzzaman.
Well, so far, the army has behaved very well. As you know, they arranged for an orderly departure of the former prime minister. They have been on the streets, at least in the beginning. They're no longer there, I think, now. They were there until the police came, but they didn't get themselves involved in the law enforcement. Actually, it was the students who managed the traffic on the streets, for example, when the police refused to come back. The police came back about 2 days ago. So the army is doing what the army should be doing. It is a civilian government, and the army is providing security and protection for the civilian government and the people for the time being.
And just going back to the ousted Prime Minister Hasina, Sheikh Hasina, what do you see happening next for her? Do you see her eventually returning to Bangladesh? Do you see her being extradited to Bangladesh? Or do you see her perhaps one day returning to power? Would you say that there's absolutely no question she will ever make a political comeback?
Well, it's hard to say what will happen to her personally because she's in her late 70s right now. But I think as far as the party is concerned, her party is the oldest political party in this country. And so obviously, as the oldest political party, it has a good structure in the ground. And there may be in months to come some efforts within the party to reform themselves. They certainly would have to reform themselves totally, look for new leadership, come up with new ideas, and then convince the population that they have changed their ways. So that's quite a heavy ask for them, from them right now. So it's very uncertain what would happen to her or to her party.
And let's just talk about the role and the diplomatic efforts by Bangladesh's neighbours. I mean, all of this has posed rather a tricky set of dilemmas for the Indian government, not least, because they have, if I'm not mistaken, demonstrated long-standing support for Sheikh Hasina, and that appears to have backfired on them now to a certain extent, not least because they're hosting her. She's in India. Has India played its cards well, do you think?
Well, I don't know how much choice they had when she turned up on their doorsteps. But India, of course, has been a great supporter of Sheikh Hasina, of her party, the Awami League, and also has had long relationships with Bangladesh. We have India on three sides of our country, the common borders with India. So, and India is a big neighbor, and obviously Yunus's government and the people as well would like to have good, strong, healthy relationships with India. People are now talking more about people-to-people relationships, not just government-to-government relationships. Obviously, India is a big trading partner for us as well. There's a lot of Indian investment in the country. So certainly everyone wants a positive relationship with India. India, on its side, has to understand that the people of this country will decide the fate of their country. And that is up to us. And India would do well to remember that point. You know, that they are a good neighbor, they should stay as a good neighbor, but what is happening in the country is really up to the people to decide.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. Bangladeshi lawyer Irene Khan, UN Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Expression and Opinion. Thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Al Arabiya English. And thanks to you for watching. We look forward to seeing you again very soon.